The thing about heartbreak is that it makes terrible theater. That's what Ms. Rodriguez always says, anyway. Real pain isn't dramatic enough for the stage, she told us on the first day of advanced drama. It's too raw, too messy, too real. I didn't know how right she was until I walked into class that September morning and saw my ex-boyfriend Chase Matthews making out with Rebecca Wilson against the props cabinet. 3 months after our breakup, and it still felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. My name is Olivia Parker, and I'd spent the entire summer convincing myself I was over Chase. We'd dated for 2 years, practically an eternity in high school time, before he decided that we'd grown in different directions right after junior prom. Translation: he'd grown in Rebecca's direction while I was busy with rehearsals for the spring musical. Places, everyone. Ms. Rodriguez's voice cut through the morning chaos like a director's cue. Time to assign partners for our first scene study unit. I slid into a seat in the back row, trying to become invisible, a talent that had mysteriously evaded me during my 3 years of drama training at Washington Heights High. That's when I noticed someone else attempting the same disappearing act. James Crawford was slouched in the corner, his usual easy smile nowhere to be seen. James was one of those guys who seemed to excel at everything without trying, star of the baseball team, honor roll student, and arguably the best actor in our department. He was also very publicly nursing his own broken heart, courtesy of Rebecca Wilson, yes, the same Rebecca currently attached to my ex's face. Our eyes met across the room, and I saw my own pain reflected in his hazel gaze. Then something shifted in his expression, a spark of the old James showing through. He raised an eyebrow at me, tilted his head toward the happy couple, and made an exaggerated gagging motion. I couldn't help it, I laughed. The sound caught Ms. Rodriguez's attention. "Ah, perfect," she exclaimed, making a note on her clipboard. "Olivia Parker and James Crawford. You'll be working on scene 4 from The Importance of Being Earnest." The universe, it seemed, had a sense of humor. Or maybe just a flair for the dramatic. "This is going to be interesting," James said, dropping into the seat next to me. He smelled like coffee and baseball leather, an oddly comforting combination. "Want to be my fake significant other to make them jealous?" He was joking mostly, but something in his voice made me look at him more closely. James Crawford had always been around the edges of my life, the guy who held doors open for everyone, who tutored freshmen in math during his free periods, who could make even Shakespeare's driest monologues sound like casual conversation. But I'd never really looked at him, not properly. "Actually," I said, surprising myself, "I have a better idea. The thing about drama kids is that we know how to put on a show. We know all about misdirection, about making the audience look where we want them to look. And right now, I wanted everyone looking anywhere but at the ache in my chest. Let's give the best performance this class has ever seen," I continued, warming to my idea. "Not for them, but for us. Let's show them what they're missing by being absolutely amazing." A slow smile spread across James's face, not his usual easy grin, but something more genuine. Method acting at its finest. Channeling our real emotions into fictional characters. Exactly. We'll be so brilliant, so completely invested in our scenes that we won't have time to be heartbroken. Ms. Rodriguez always says that the best acting comes from truth, James mused, then held out his hand. "Partners?" I took his hand, ignoring the little spark that shot through me at the contact. Partners. What I didn't know then was that this partnership would change everything. That somewhere between rehearsals and coffee runs, between staged kisses and real conversations, between pretending to be in love and actually falling, we'd create something that no script could have predicted. As we started reading through our scene, a comedy about mistaken identities and the games people play with love, Chase and Rebecca's presence faded to background noise. Instead, I found myself caught up in the way James brought the words to life, the way he could shift from humor to vulnerability in the space of a breath. "The truth is rarely pure and never simple," James quoted from the play, but his eyes held something more than just the lines. "Think we can handle that?" I thought about truth then, about how I'd spent 2 years thinking Chase was my leading man, only to end up in the wrong story entirely. About how sometimes the best roles are the ones we never saw coming. I think, I said carefully, that's exactly what we need. Our first rehearsal was scheduled for that afternoon in the school's black box theater. As I watched James gather his things, noting the way his shoulders straightened when he passed Chase and Rebecca, I realized something important. Sometimes the best way to get over someone is to stop playing the part they cast you in. We were about to put on the performance of our lives. We just didn't know yet that the real show wouldn't be happening on any stage. After all, as Ms. Rodriguez always says, life makes terrible theater, but theater, sometimes, makes incredible life. Part 2, Rehearsal for Reality. The Black Box Theater had always been my sanctuary at Washington Heights High. Something about the dark walls, the smell of sawdust and stage paint, the way sound seemed to hang in the air like invisible curtains, it made everything else feel far away. But that afternoon, as James and I sat cross-legged on the floor running lines, the real world felt closer than ever. The very essence of romance is uncertainty, James read from his script, his voice taking on the crisp accent of his character. Then he broke character, running a hand through his dark hair. You know what's not uncertain? The fact that Rebecca is absolutely bombing her scene with Chase right now. I glanced across the theater where several other pairs were rehearsing. He wasn't wrong. Rebecca had always been more interested in looking pretty on stage than actually connecting with the material. Focus, Crawford, I said, tapping his script with mine. We're not here to watch train wrecks. Right, sorry. He cleared his throat, slipping back into character. The very essence of romance is uncertainty. If ever I get married, I'll certainly try to forget the fact. I have no doubt about that, dear Algie, I replied as Cecily, letting myself fall into the rhythm of Oscar Wilde's wit. The subject is extremely attractive. I fancy there will be more tears shed in this country than usual, when you are married at last. We worked through the scene several times, each run through feeling more natural than the last. James had an incredible ability to make each delivery feel fresh, finding new layers in lines we'd read dozens of times. It was impossible not to respond to that energy, to get caught up in the dance of words and emotions. During our water break, Ms. Rodriguez stopped by our corner. Something interesting is happening here, she said, watching us with her director's eye. You're both playing against type, and it's working beautifully. Olivia, you're usually so controlled on stage, but there's a wonderful wildness to your Cecily. And James, I've never seen you so vulnerable. She walked away before we could respond, leaving us to consider her words. She was right. I was playing Cecily differently than I'd played any role before. There was a freedom in it, in letting go of the perfect, polished performances I usually strived for. You know what this scene needs? James said suddenly, jumping to his feet. Physical blocking. We've got the words down, but we're just sitting here like we're reading for English class. He pulled me up, his hand warm against mine. Okay, so you've just come from the garden, right? You should enter from there. He pointed to the left wing. And I'll be here, pretending to write in my diary about how desperately in love with you I am. That's Cecily's bit, I corrected him, laughing. You're supposed to be the cynical one. Right, right. I'll be here, pretending to be cynical about love while secretly being fascinated by you. Something in the way he said it made my heart skip a beat, but I pushed the feeling aside. This was acting. Just acting. We ran the scene again, this time with movement. James had natural instincts for blocking. He knew exactly when to cross the stage, when to create distance, when to move closer. During the climactic moment of the scene, he caught my hand, pulling me back just as I was about to storm off stage. I hope, Cecily, I shall not offend you if I state quite frankly and openly that you seem to me to be in every way the visible personification of absolute perfection. The words hung in the air between us. James was still holding my hand, his thumb brushing absent-mindedly across my knuckles. I was suddenly very aware of how close we were standing, of the flecks of gold in his hazel eyes, of the way the stage lights caught in his dark hair. Wow, you guys are really selling it. The moment shattered. Rebecca was standing in the wing, Chase hovering awkwardly behind her. I dropped James's hand like it had burned me. Just doing our jobs, James said smoothly, but I noticed his ears had turned red. How's your scene coming along? Oh, you know, Rebecca flipped her perfect blonde hair, it's a challenge making these old plays relevant. But Chase and I are trying something modern with it. Is that what you're calling it? The words slipped out before I could stop them, sharper than I'd intended. An awkward silence fell. Chase was studying his shoes like they held the secrets of the universe. Rebecca's perfect smile took on a brittle edge. Well, keep up the good work, she said finally, tugging Chase away. You two are so convincing. After they left, James and I looked at each other and burst out laughing. Did you see Chase's face? James wheezed. He looked like he was trying to solve calculus in his head. Rebecca's modern take probably involves selfies and Instagram quotes, I added, wiping tears from my eyes. But as our laughter faded, something else settled in its place, a question neither of us was ready to ask. How much of what we'd just performed was really acting? The rest of rehearsal passed in a blur of run-throughs and notes. As we packed up our scripts, James hesitated. Hey, do you want to grab coffee? To work on character development, obviously. Obviously, I echoed, trying to ignore the flutter in my stomach. Strictly professional. Completely professional, he agreed, holding the door open for me. We can discuss our motivation and subtext and absolutely nothing else. We ended up at The Grind, the coffee shop 2 blocks from school where all the drama kids hung out. James insisted on paying for my caramel macchiato, it's a business expense, we're working, remember, and we claimed the corner table by the window. 3 hours later, we'd barely looked at our scripts. Instead, we'd talked about everything else: his baseball scholarships offers, my dreams of studying theater in New York, our shared love of old movies, our matching collections of embarrassing childhood stories. I learned that his laugh had different levels, from a quiet chuckle to a full-body laugh that made his eyes crinkle at the corners. He discovered my habit of talking with my hands when I got excited about something. It wasn't until my phone buzzed with a text from my mom asking where I was that I realized how late it had gotten. Same time tomorrow? James asked as we gathered our things. For rehearsal, I mean. For rehearsal, I agreed, trying not to smile too widely. Walking home in the gathering dusk, I thought about what Ms. Rodriguez had said about playing against type. Maybe she was right, maybe there was something happening here that neither of us had scripted. Because while we might have started this partnership to avoid our exes, something else was taking center stage. I just wasn't sure if either of us was ready for the next act. Part 3, Plot Twist. They say timing is everything in theater. A missed cue, a late entrance, a rushed line, any of these can ruin a perfect scene. But sometimes, the worst timing happens off stage. 2 weeks after our first rehearsal, James and I had fallen into a comfortable routine. Afternoon practices in the black box, coffee at the grind, long conversations that had nothing to do with our scene study and everything to do with us. We'd gotten so good at playing our parts that even Ms. Rodriguez was impressed, using us as an example for the rest of the class. See how James and Olivia are connecting, she'd say. They're not just reciting lines, they're having a real conversation. If only she knew how real those conversations had become. That Friday, we were running our scene for what felt like the 100th time, but somehow it still felt fresh. James had just delivered his line about absolute perfection when Ms. Rodriguez clapped her hands excitedly. Perfect. Absolutely perfect. This is exactly what we need for the showcase. The whole class froze. What showcase? Someone asked. Ms. Rodriguez beamed. Oh, didn't I mention? The state drama competition is hosting a special showcase next month. Schools can enter their best scene study pairs. The winners get a summer workshop at the National Theatre Institute in Connecticut, plus a chance to perform at the Kennedy Center's youth program. The room erupted in excited chatter. The National Theatre Institute was legendary. Some of Broadway's biggest stars had started there. And the Kennedy Center? That was the holy grail for high school performers. Olivia, James, Ms. Rodriguez continued, I'd like to enter your scene. With a few weeks of intensive rehearsal, I think you could really have a shot at winning. I looked at James, my heart racing. His eyes were bright with excitement, but there was something else there too, hesitation. Can we think about it? He asked. Ms. Rodriguez looked surprised but nodded. After class, James pulled me aside. Meet me at the grind. We should talk about this. The walk to the coffee shop felt longer than usual. James was unusually quiet, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. When we finally sat down with our drinks, he took a deep breath. I got a call from Stanford yesterday. My stomach dropped. James had mentioned applying for their baseball program, but I hadn't realized decisions would come so soon. They're offering me early admission and a full athletic scholarship, he continued. But there's a catch. They want me to join their summer training program. It starts the same week as the theater workshop. Oh. The word felt small in my mouth. That's amazing, James. Stanford is your dream school. Yeah. He stared into his coffee. But this showcase opportunity. Liv, you're incredible on stage. You deserve to perform at the Kennedy Center. I don't want to hold you back. You're not holding me back, I said quickly. We can find another scene partner. Rebecca would probably love to. I don't want another partner. The intensity in his voice startled us both. He lowered his voice. I mean, these past few weeks, working with you, it's been. James Crawford. Is that you? We both looked up to see a stunning girl with long dark hair approaching our table. James's face went through a series of expressions I couldn't read before settling on something like panic. Sophie. What are you doing here? I'm visiting my dad for the weekend, she said, sliding into the seat next to James like she belonged there. I can't believe you're still hanging out at the grind. Remember how we used to spend hours here last summer? Last summer. When James was supposedly dating Rebecca. Sophie must have noticed my confusion because she extended her hand. Hi, I'm Sophie Chen. James's girlfriend from California. Well, ex-girlfriend, I guess, since the long-distance thing wasn't working. But now that I'm moving back. The world tilted sideways. I looked at James, who looked like he wanted to disappear into his coffee cup. I'm Olivia, I managed to say. James's scene partner. For drama class. Drama class? Sophie laughed. Since when do you act, James? You always said theater was pretentious. Each word felt like a slap. All those conversations about old movies, about the power of live performance, about wanting to make art that moved people, had those been lies too? Liv, wait, James started as I stood up. I can explain. No need, I cut him off. You're right, we should find different partners for the showcase. Clearly, you're a better actor than I gave you credit for. I walked out of the grind, leaving my half-finished coffee and my illusions behind. The autumn air felt colder than it had a few hours ago, or maybe that was just me. By Monday morning, the whole drama department was buzzing with the news: Rebecca and Chase had broken up. Apparently, she'd found texts on his phone from another girl. The irony might have been funny if I wasn't so busy dealing with my own dramatic plot twist. You're still the best scene study pair, Ms. Rodriguez said when I asked about changing partners. Whatever's going on off stage, don't let it affect your performance. Easy for her to say. She wasn't the one who had to look into James Crawford's stupidly sincere eyes and pretend to fall in love with him every afternoon. But the thing about theater kids is that we know the show must go on. So I showed up to rehearsal, professional as ever. James tried to talk to me between runs, but I kept our conversation strictly about blocking and line readings. The very essence of romance is uncertainty. He delivered his line, but this time it felt different, raw, almost pleading. I have no doubt about that, I replied coolly, turning away before I could see the hurt in his eyes. It wasn't until I got home that evening that I found the note in my script. The truth about last summer is more complicated than you think. Meet me in the auditorium tomorrow morning before class. I promise this isn't just another act. J. I stared at the note for a long time, remembering what Ms. Rodriguez always said about truth being messier than theater. I thought about Sophie's casual revelations, about James's passion for performance that might or might not have been real, about the way my heart still skipped when he looked at me despite everything. The question was I ready to hear his truth, or was it better to stick to the script we'd started with two heartbroken people using each other to avoid their real feelings? As I fell asleep that night, Oscar Wilde's words echoed in my head, the very essence of romance is uncertainty. I just hadn't expected quite so much of it in my own story. Part 4, Behind the Scenes. The school auditorium looks different at 7 a.m. Emptier, somehow. Bigger. The morning light filtering through the high windows created strange shadows on the stage, turning familiar shapes into something almost magical. Or maybe that was just my nervous imagination. James was already there when I arrived, sitting on the edge of the stage with 2 cups from the grind. He looked like he hadn't slept much. "You came," he said softly, holding out my usual caramel macchiato. I'm still not sure why I did. I took the coffee but remained standing. "What could you possibly have to explain, James? That you had a secret girlfriend in California while dating Rebecca? That you've been lying about loving theater?" He ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "Yes. No. It's complicated. Then uncomplicated." He patted the stage beside him. After a moment's hesitation, I sat down, leaving careful space between us. "Last summer," he began, "my parents sent me to a baseball camp in California. They're determined to see me play professionally, following in my dad's footsteps. That's where I met Sophie. She was the camp director's daughter." He took a sip of his coffee, gathering his thoughts. "Sophie was safe. She liked baseball, didn't ask too many questions, fit perfectly into my parents' plan for my life. We dated for a few weeks, but it was never serious, at least not for me. When I came back home, I thought we'd both moved on." "And Rebecca?" "Rebecca was also safe, in a different way. The perfect girlfriend for the baseball star. She didn't care that I spent hours in the school theater after baseball practice, watching rehearsals from the back row. She just assumed I was waiting for her. I remembered seeing him there sometimes, but I'd always thought he was just being a supportive boyfriend." "But you weren't waiting for Rebecca, were you?" He looked at me then, really looked at me. "No. I was watching you." My heart did a complicated flip. "Me? You were playing Beatrice in Much Ado About Nothing. There was this moment in Act 4, when you delivered the 'Kill Claudio' line. I'd never seen anyone make Shakespeare feel so real, so raw. That's when I realized I didn't want to play it safe anymore." "So you broke up with Rebecca?" "I tried to. But then she found out about Sophie. Apparently someone from camp posted old photos online. She was hurt, understandably, and she started dating Chase to get back at me. I deserved it. But by then, I didn't care about Rebecca or Sophie. I just wanted." He trailed off, looking out at the empty auditorium seats. "The thing about baseball," he continued, "is that it's all about perfect form, following the established rules. But theater? Theater is about breaking rules, about finding truth in fiction. When we were assigned as partners, I thought maybe it was my chance to finally be honest with you, with myself. But I screwed it up. What about Stanford? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The summer training program? I turned it down. What? I nearly spilled my coffee. But it's your dream school. No, he shook his head. It's my parents' dream. My dream. He took a deep breath. My dream is to perform at the Kennedy Center with the most talented actress I know. To spend my summer at the National Theatre Institute, learning how to tell stories that matter. To stop pretending to be someone I'm not. James. I know I messed up, Liv. I should have told you everything from the beginning. But every moment with you in rehearsal, at the grind, even just walking to class has been more real than any performance I've ever given. And if you'll let me, I'd like to show you who I really am. The morning light had shifted, catching his face in a way that made his eyes look almost golden. In that moment, he looked more vulnerable than any character he'd ever played. Ms. Rodriguez says that real emotion is too messy for the stage, I said slowly. But maybe that's because real life doesn't follow a script. Is that a yes? To giving me another chance? Instead of answering, I pulled out my script. The very essence of romance is uncertainty, I quoted. But sometimes you have to be certain about what you want. His smile was brighter than the stage lights. And what do you want, Olivia Parker? The answer was clear, had been clear maybe since that first day in drama class. But before I could speak, the auditorium doors burst open. There you are. Rebecca's voice echoed through the space. I've been looking everywhere for you both. She was clutching a stack of papers, her face flushed with what looked like either excitement or anger. It was hard to tell with Rebecca. The showcase, she said, waving the papers. There's something you need to know about the judges. And just like that, our moment of truth was interrupted by yet another plot twist. Because in theater, as in life, timing really is everything. Part 5, Final Act. Rebecca's heels clicked against the wooden stage as she walked toward us, each step echoing in the empty auditorium like a countdown. I was acutely aware that James and I were sitting closer than we had been when our conversation started, our scripts forming a bridge between us. One of the showcase judges, Rebecca announced, holding up her papers, is Daniel Crawford. James went completely still beside me. My uncle? The Broadway director Daniel Crawford is your uncle? I asked, pieces suddenly clicking into place. Unfortunately, James muttered. He hasn't spoken to my dad since Dad quit theater for baseball 20 years ago. Classic family drama. Rebecca's perfect eyebrows arched. Well, he's speaking now. Or at least, he will be as head judge for the showcase. I looked between them, feeling like I was missing something crucial. Isn't that a good thing? Having a connection to one of the judges? No, James said quietly. It's terrible. Because if we win, everyone will assume it's because of him. And if we lose, they'll assume he was extra hard on you to avoid showing favoritism, I finished, understanding dawning. But how did you find this out, Rebecca? She shifted uncomfortably. I may have overheard Ms. Rodriguez talking to the principal. They're considering pulling our entry to avoid any appearance of impropriety. They can't do that. I stood up, my voice bouncing off the auditorium walls. We've worked too hard. Why do you care? James asked Rebecca suddenly. After everything. Rebecca's perfect posture slumped slightly. Because I was wrong. About a lot of things. Chase, for one, he really was texting another girl. And about you, James. I thought you were just playing a part, being the perfect boyfriend. But watching you two in rehearsal. She gestured between us. That's real. Whatever it is between you two, it's more real than anything Chase and I ever had. A heavy silence fell over the auditorium. Outside, we could hear the first students arriving for the day, their voices muffled by the heavy doors. "So what do we do?" I asked finally. James stood up, pacing across the stage. "We could withdraw voluntarily," he suggested. "Save everyone the trouble." "No." The word came out sharper than I intended. "No more playing it safe, remember." He stopped pacing, looking at me with those intense hazel eyes. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting we do exactly what we've been doing, tell the truth through theater. Let's perform our scene exactly as we've rehearsed it, with all the real emotion Ms. Rodriguez says is too messy for the stage. Let your uncle see it. Let everyone see it." "The very essence of romance is uncertainty," Rebecca quoted softly, surprising us both. "Maybe that's what this whole situation needs, a little uncertainty, a little risk." James walked back to where I stood, taking both my hands in his. "Are you sure? We could lose everything. Or we could win everything," I countered. "Either way, we'll know we did it our way." 3 weeks later, we stood backstage at the state showcase, listening to the murmur of the audience beyond the curtain. James's uncle was out there somewhere, along with college scouts, theater directors, and hundreds of other people who could make or break our future careers. "Ready?" James whispered, squeezing my hand. I looked at him, really looked at him. Gone was the baseball star playing it safe, gone was the boy hiding his dreams behind other people's expectations. In his place stood someone real, someone who had chosen to be exactly who he was, regardless of the consequences. "One thing first," I said, and before I could overthink it, I kissed him. Not a stage kiss, not a rehearsed moment, but something entirely real and wonderfully imperfect. When we pulled apart, his smile was brighter than any spotlight. What was that for? For helping me realize that sometimes the best performances aren't performances at all. We didn't win the showcase that day. James's uncle, true to expectations, was harder on us than any other pair. But something else happened, something better. After our performance, Daniel Crawford came backstage. He looked at his nephew for a long moment before saying, "You remind me of your father," before he forgot who he really was. Don't make the same mistake. 2 days later, an offer arrived from a small but prestigious theater program in New York, not for the summer, but for college. They wanted both of us, having seen something special in our performance. Something real. "I guess we're both going east after all," James said when I showed him my acceptance letter. We were back at the grind, in our usual corner table, but everything else had changed. "What about your parents?" "Stanford. They saw the showcase too," he smiled. "Dad actually cried. Said he hadn't seen honest acting like that since he was on stage himself." Rebecca ended up winning the showcase with a new partner and a completely different scene. She's heading to UCLA for their film program. Turns out she prefers being behind the camera, directing others in their performances. We still get coffee sometimes, all of us, and laugh about how differently things turned out from what we'd planned. Ms. Rodriguez uses our showcase performance as an example now, but not of perfect technique or flawless delivery. Instead, she talks about the moment when theater and truth become indistinguishable, when the lines between acting and reality blur until something new and beautiful emerges. James and I still perform our scene sometimes, just for fun. The words are the same, but they mean something different now. Because while we may have paired up in drama class to avoid our exes, what we found instead was the courage to stop acting to be ourselves, messy and real and perfectly imperfect. After all, as Ms. Rodriguez always says, real emotion might make terrible theater, but real love? That makes the greatest story of all. And this time, we're not acting anymore.